Have you ever stopped to think about the bank that holds your money? You probably just picture a physical building, an ATM, or maybe an app on your phone. But honestly, that bank is just one tiny piece of a massive, heavily regulated, legally bound puzzle that serves literally over 1 billion lives. It's a completely wild ecosystem that ranges from massive public sector giants all the way down to small-scale village societies. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore the fascinating blueprint of the Indian banking system, and we're looking strictly at the legal and structural frameworks that keep this whole machine running.
Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 4 main stops. First, the boss, RBI and definitions. Second, the diverse banking ecosystem. Third, the bank's toolbelt, core functions. And finally, number 4, landmark banking showdowns.
Okay, let's jump right into Section 1, the boss, RBI and definitions.
So before we even start talking about banks, we have to lay down a fundamental rule. Like, what legally makes a bank a bank? Well, according to Section 5B of the Banking Regulation Act of 1949, banking means accepting deposits of money from the public, specifically for the purpose of lending or investment. But here is the kicker. Those deposits absolutely must be repayable on demand and withdrawable by check, draft, order, or otherwise. If an institution doesn't check those specific legal boxes, they are playing a completely different game entirely.
Now, overseeing this whole shebang is the Reserve Bank of India, established way back under the RBI Act of 1934. The RBI is basically the banker's bank. They issue currency, manage foreign exchange, regulate credit, all that stuff. But they also draw the ultimate line in the sand, splitting banks into 2 main camps. On one side, we've got scheduled banks. These are the heavyweights included in the second schedule of the RBI Act, and they need at least 5 lakh rupees in paid-up capital and reserves. On the other side, non-scheduled banks. These are usually your smaller, local operators with limited reach and, crucially, way less access to the RBI's credit facilities.
All right, moving on to Section 2, the diverse banking ecosystem. When you really dig into the banking laws, it becomes super clear that this ecosystem isn't just a copy-paste of one business model. To handle a massive developing economy and a really diverse population, the system is broken down into very strict statutory classifications. Let's meet this fascinating cast of characters.
First up, the big guys, public sector banks, or PSBs. This is where the Government of India or the RBI holds a majority stake, over 51%. Think State Bank of India or Punjab National Bank. Their main gig? Social banking and financial inclusion. Then you've got private sector banks. These are owned by individuals or corps, totally profit-driven and super focused on tech and efficiency. They're even split into old generation and new generation banks like HDFC or ICICI. And finally, foreign banks. These are headquartered outside India but operate locally to help multinational corporations with cross-border trade.
Now here is a really cool structural setup, regional rural banks, or RRBs. They were created back in 1976 following the Narasimham Working Group recommendations, specifically to give credit to small farmers and rural artisans who just couldn't access commercial banks. And their joint venture DNA is brilliant. They are funded exactly 50% by the central government, 35% by a sponsor bank, and 15% by the state government. It's a true team effort for rural credit.
And rounding out the ecosystem, we have the cooperative banks. These are grassroots, democratic, one-member, one-vote setups designed for microfinancing at concessional rates. They follow a super rigid 3-tier structure. At the very top, at the state level, you have the apex state cooperative banks. Step down a level and you find the central cooperative banks. Yeah, the name is a little confusing, but they operate at the district level. And then right down in the dirt at the village level are the primary agricultural credit societies, or PACs.
So how do all these banks actually survive? That brings us to Section 3, the bank's toolbelt, core functions.
At the end of the day, every single bank relies on 2 primary functions. First, absorbing money. That's the acceptance of deposits. You've got savings accounts for modest interest, current accounts for businesses doing heavy transactions, fixed deposits for locking in higher interest, and recurring deposits. You put money in. Then, second, they pump that money right back out into the economy by granting loans and advances. We're talking short-term cash credit against inventory, overdrafts, or big-term loans like a home or car loan.
But, a modern bank's toolbelt goes way, way beyond just taking deposits and handing out loans. It's their secondary functions that really make them indispensable to us. First, they act as agents, clearing checks, doing NEFT, RTGS, or UPI transfers, even acting as trustees. Plus, they offer general utility services, Think safe deposit lockers for your valuables, issuing letters of credit, handling foreign exchange, or even underwriting shares. They literally keep the gears of daily life turning.
Okay, let's turn up the heat. Section 4. Landmark Banking Showdowns.
Our first major clash takes us to the year 2020. The case is Ponderan Ganpati Chowgule versus Vishwasrao Patil Morgud Sahakari Bank. Here's what happened. A borrower was hit with some aggressive recovery proceedings by a cooperative bank under the heavy-hitting SARFACI Act of 2002. The borrower fought back, basically arguing, hey, you're just a cooperative society, not a real bank under union law. You shouldn't have these massive debt recovery powers against me.
So this forced the Supreme Court to answer a huge structural question. Do cooperative banks legally fall within the definition of banking under parliamentary legislative power? In other words, do they actually get to wield the same big sticks as the commercial giants?
The verdict? A resounding yes. The Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court held that cooperative banks are absolutely involved in the business of banking, as defined in the Banking Regulation Act. Because of that, they fall straight under the legislative power of Parliament. This was a monumental decision. It brought cooperative banks under central recovery laws, giving them the exact same powers as the commercial titans to go out and recover bad loans.
And I really want to take a second to point out, these aren't just dry, abstract ideas. These dense legal judgments are the literal blueprints that shape how millions of rupees are moved, protected, or forcefully recovered every single day across the country. All right, our second showdown. We're stepping back in time a bit to an employment dispute in 1989. Prathama Bank versus Vijay Kumar Goel. So an employee of Prathama Bank, which, fun fact, was actually India's very first regional rural bank, was fired. He challenged the termination. But the bank pushed back hard, arguing, look, we're just a bank. We aren't the government. We aren't the state under Article 12 of the Constitution.
The central question here was profound. Is a regional rural bank actually considered an instrumentality of the state? Meaning, is a bank worker entitled to the exact same strict constitutional protections as a standard government employee?
The Supreme Court said, yes, they are. Think back to that 50-35-15 funding split we talked about earlier. Because RRBs were established by a central act and are so heavily controlled, funded, and managed by the central government and sponsor banks, they absolutely are instrumentalities of the state. This meant RRBs couldn't just fire people on a whim. They had to strictly adhere to the constitutional principles of natural justice and equality. Finally, our third showdown from 2003. And this one is juicy because it features a direct clash with the grand architect itself, the RBI. A multi-state cooperative society applied for a license to act as an apex bank. And the RBI actually said yes, granting the license. Well, the existing state cooperative banks immediately hit the roof and challenged it in court. The fundamental tension was this. Does the mighty RBI even have the discretionary authority to grant an apex license to a multi-state society, even when that entity is not officially recognized under the NABARD Act? Did the apex regulator just overstep its own legal boundaries? In a brilliant twist, the Supreme Court said yes, the RBI overstepped. The license was completely quashed. The court ruled that under the Banking Regulation Act, the RBI can only license specific types of cooperative banks, state, central, and primary, exactly as they are defined in the NABARD Act. It was a massive reality check, proving that even the all-powerful RBI is strictly bound by the legislative framework. So we've traced the definitions, mapped out a crazy diverse ecosystem from foreign giants to village societies, checked out their tools, and witnessed the legal battles that define their borders. But all of this leaves us with one final, totally provocative thought to chew on. In an ecosystem governed by strict statutes, regulated by an apex bank, but ultimately refereed by the highest court in the land, who truly holds the power over India's financial future? Is it the free market, the RBI, or the Supreme Court? Think about that the next time you casually swipe your debit card. Thanks for hanging out with me on this explainer. Keep learning and keep questioning the systems around you.